Hi everyone, I'm GREYMOND. Today I wanted to talk to you about how OCD develops as the person grows. I think that this is an important topic because you need to understand that your situation is in no way unique from other people in the general sense. Most people who I talk to pretty much have the same story. So when the child is very little, parents and the child themselves notice that they are more sensitive than their peers. Their feelings are hurt much more easily. They have more of a tendency to dwell on things. It's hard for them to let things go. Just very, very sensitive, again, as compared to their peers. In terms of OCD thoughts specifically, what I see a lot of the time is that the thoughts will kind of come and go over a period of, say, for example, the child will have a thought for a period of 6 months, and it could be a thought to thought kind of idea, just like everybody else with OCD. But then after the 6 months, they might not have another thought for, say, a year or 2 years or 3 years, and then they'll again have this bout of OCD and then nothing. I see this a lot of the time. I do see it when it's consistent right from childhood, but I would say overall, and again, I'm talking about my 10 years of experience of helping people recover from OCD. So I do hear, I have new people coming in every day, right? So I do see, I do hear a lot of stories, so this is the data, basically, basically the data from all of those stories over the course of 10 years. So going back to how it develops is the child might have an OCD bout, and I find that this was true with me, and this is true with quite a few people that I talk to. I would say at least 50%, but leaning towards more than 50%, is that when they're little, they instinctively know to disregard the thought. So they feel the severity of the thought, but the kids know to disregard it. So, when I say kids, I mean like under 10 years old. So so they go through the thought, and then at some point they understand that I can't keep going like this. I need to disregard, and they start to actively disregard. This most of the time, this happens without even talking to their parents about it. Again, this is what I see a lot of the time. I help When I help kids, I talk to the parents, and I talk to the child until I talk to the parents. And when I talk to the parent, I ask them, how long has your child had OCD? And the parent will tell one story, but then when I actually talk to the child, it turns out that they've really had OCD a lot longer than the parent even understands. And this is the case pretty much all the time. So anyways, the child on their own kind of understands that they need to disregard, and obviously you do ERP, you recover, right? So they are successful, but because they don't obviously understand how OCD works, they just kind of instinctively know how to do that, and it's just the basics of they feel they know how to do that. It's a very bizarre thing. It's hard for me to explain, but because I was in that situation and I experienced it when I was little, and going around and around and just having like silly thoughts, what if something happens to your parents, those kinds of thoughts, which is most of the time the topic with kids. After a while, you kind of see that as a kid, right? You see that it's not working, so you're like, okay, I can't keep going like this. I need to stop trying to do compulsions, and then you stop doing compulsions and you see, oh, I feel a little bit better. It works. Basically ERP, but you don't know that it's ERP. You don't know how OCD works. And because you don't have that knowledge, yes, you won that battle, but you didn't win the war with OCD, right? So then OCD might be dormant for, maybe a year, a few years, and then it comes back. So what I see is as the child grows, and as they get to, I would say, 12, 16, 18, around that age, OCD starts to become more and more prevalent. So instead of having a break of maybe a few years of not having a thought, the person starts to see that they don't get much of a break anymore, and the thoughts are extremely intense. And I would say, and again, this is not what I'm saying is not true for absolutely everybody, but it is an overwhelming majority who experiences most of these situations. Again, everybody's a little bit different, and childhoods can be extremely difficult and um, uh, extremely difficult and extremely different for different people, obviously. So it really kind of depends on the personal experience. My childhood, personally, I was lucky enough to have a fairly normal childhood. So this was also my story. I see people coming from extreme childhoods and also having a very similar story. Of course, their situation was much harder because they had to deal with a lot of stuff on top of it. So going back to the development, right? So around 16 to 18, I see that the thoughts start to get much more intense. The themes start to shift from one to another as the person grows up, matures. Different fears start to come in, and again, pretty much every fear that teenagers at this point have is all the stuff that's hyped in the news, because that's where they're really getting it. So any kind of hyped in the news, I would say, or hyped in the family, you know. So a person who's, say, for example, very religious can have, or is from a very religious family, can have religious fears. A person who is from a very unstable family can have fears that deal with stability. A person who's experienced trauma can have harm fears, right? So it kind of depends on the background, I would say, a lot, not fully, because it could be just something that the person finds extremely scary, right? That just triggers them, right? But a lot of the times it kind of has to do with past experience. So, but anyways, so as the person gets to the age of 16, 18, and so on, that free time, so to speak, from OCD starts to shorten and shorten and shorten, and it kind of hits a peak around, I would say, 20-ish, 2025 at max. I would say 25 probably at max. I would say usually it's around closer to 20 where the first real, okay, this is something serious. This is not just a little bit anxious. This is not just anything. We have a problem, kind of thing. And then basically this is where the similarities end. After this, it depends on the specific person. So if this specific person starts to really work on their recovery, they will start to recover. And probably if they start to work on their recovery earlier, they wouldn't even get to this point. But I'm saying from this point, if they start to really work on the recovery, really do ERP, understand how OCD works, they recover. If they don't, they just continue to do the worst, to get worse. If they kind of do this 50-50, kind of one step forward, one step back, then they might kind of keep themselves above water enough to just continue to float, but they're not really they're not really getting anywhere in terms of actual recovery because they're just not doing enough ERP. So from after this age, it really depends on what is happening, and of course, real life stuff also has a huge effect. So if a person is really stressed out, they have traumatic things happening in their life, that doesn't help, and generally people around age 20 years old have a lot of stuff going on in their life, not necessarily. And when I say trauma, that might not be, or dramatic things, I don't mean necessarily negative. I just mean stress, extremely stressful to the person. So I've seen people get OCD right after graduating, right after getting married, or right before getting married, or right before moving, right before switching jobs. Any kind of a major change can trigger OCD, because the mind is, you have to understand too, and this, if you're a parent and you have a child who has OCD, or if you're a child not knowing what triggered OCD, and a lot of the times there is this kind of residual kind of, kind of anger. Like, anger is not really the right word, but um, feeling like, well, my parents should have done something. Maybe my parents did uh, push me kind of too much in whatever area, or we moved too much, or they didn't have a good relationship, or whatever. Like, this pushed me into having OCD. And realistically, I don't really think it's true. I think the person is born extremely sensitive, and sooner or later, life will push that person who is really very sensitive to their limit. And when that happens, they will develop OCD. So I think it's almost, it was kind of I don't want to say meant to be, but it was very, very likely. Of course, if you are dealing with trauma every day, that doesn't help, or trauma, or drama, or stress, or constant instability. Of course, it doesn't help, and it will push you to the limit a lot faster. You know, but realistically, I don't think if you had completely stable life, I mean, it's impossible to have a completely stable life all your life anyways. So, but I think it would be very, very difficult to avoid OCD having that kind of initial makeup, right from the get-go, right? It would be pretty much impossible. So that's how basically OCD works. I hope you find this video helpful. I do think it's important for you to have this in your base of knowledge about OCD recovery, because you need to know exactly how OCD works, exactly how the process happens, and from there you can see, okay, well, this is not only happening to me. And again, this story that I'm telling you about, the standard person developing OCD, if it doesn't match your situation 100%, that does not mean that yours is different, that maybe mine is true, or maybe mine is real, because that's kind of what OCD wants to always kind of push you into, right? That kind of thought process and start rumination. No, this is the standard story. Everybody is a little bit different. So sometimes people will tell me like, oh, I had OCD since childhood, but maybe it was a constant thing, or maybe it wasn't that bad. There's variations to it, but standard, I would say, I hear this is kind of the standard story. So don't take it too literal. I hope you find my videos helpful. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, please subscribe. I do daily videos talking about all things OCD. If you'd like to do the recovery program, as always, all the information is on youhaveocd.com. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you tomorrow.